Many of you are probably wondering, what do I tell my kids? If your kids are like my kids, they're coming home from school and there are war and rumor of war. Matthew 24 talks about that. Jesus saying, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see that you are not alarmed. All things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nations will rise, nations will fall. It's all part of life and our human existence. So a lot of people, they're discombobulated right now. You will note they're in a lot of talk of COVID and masks today. The age of COVID came to an end the moment the Russians invaded Ukraine. We have bigger issues now. Josh Howerton is a pastor and put up an interesting thread on social media, on Twitter in particular, about the church and reality. And I want to dive into some of this because the data here is very interesting. From a lot of it Barna Research. A lot of times you hear, for example, that evangelicals and the Christian church, they're not really pro-life. They're just pro-birth. They don't really care about babies after they're born. The data actually shows that conservative Christians in the United States are more likely to adopt than any other population segment, more than double the non-church population when it comes to adoption. We hear that the church is sexually repressive and anti-sex and purity culture, and it turns out people who go to church have more sex more regularly than any other part of the population. We hear that the church is emotionally repressive and destructive to your mental health. Actually, regular church attendance dramatically improves your mental health. The only people in the United States whose mental health improved in 2020 were regular church attendees. We hear that evangelicals don't care about the poor. They only care about their political power. Actually, church-going Christians are exponentially more generous to the poor with their time and their money than the rest of the population. People who attend church services are between 27 and 52 times more likely to give money. I'm sorry, I misread that. People who attend regular church services 27 to 52 times per year are more than 5 times likely to give money to the poor than people who don't attend church services. The church is oppressive to women. It's a tool of the patriarchy. Actually, conservative Christian, gender tradition, church-going women are in the happiest relationships in America and suffer less abuse. Think about that. That's the actual data. That women in conservative church denominations who do not allow women pastors are actually far less likely to be abused and are far more likely to say they're in a happy relationship. The less church attendance, the more abuse of women increases. The church is morally backward and bad for society, they tell us, according to the data. The higher the church attendance, the lower the participation in burglary, larceny, robbery, assault, homicide, etc. Churched communities, people in communities that have more church attendance have less violence and crime. The church is irrelevant or ideologically or emotionally harmful to raising children. Actually, the data suggests regular church attendance significantly decreases all three of the big 3 dangers of adolescence: depression, substance abuse, and sexual promiscuity. The church doesn't help your marriage. Divorce rates are the same. I hear this all the time, that the rate of divorce within the church is the same as the unchurched. Actually, people who attend church regularly are 35% less likely to divorce. Church is a waste of time, people say. Actually, regular church attendance literally gives you more time, increasing life expectancy by up to 7 years. Doesn't mean churches are perfect, but the data is contrary to what you probably hear. I know I hear the one all the time that divorce rate within the church is the same as out of the church. Actually, that's not true. The divorce rate among self-declared Christians is the same as among those who aren't Christian, but among those who actually attend church, it's far less. Or you hear about the abuse within churches, the spousal abuse and the like. Actually, Women who go to churches that are complementarian, that is, they believe women complement the husband's role and are not equal to the husband, actually have far less rates of abuse. And those women tend to identify as in happier relationships and have happier marriages. All of what the culture tells you about the church is far different from the actual church, from what the data actually shows. Now, this data comes from Pew Research and Barna, two well-respected researchers. This is an appropriate place probably to wrap up the show today, given everything that's going on in Ukraine with the Russian invasion for this reason. Contrary to what you may hear in popular society, the people who are engaged in a church community tend to be happier, have far less depression, live longer, and have a more positive outlook on life. And that's really important right now because the world seems like it's coming undone. At home and abroad, the world seems like it's coming undone. And it is. The world is supposed to come undone. If you have a Christian worldview or not, you tend to realize that not everything stays the same. Things are deeply unsettled. Our land is on tectonic plates that collide into each other and cause earthquakes and volcanoes. The world can be deeply unsettling. If you have a worldview that contemplates sin in the world, you know we're all sinners. And you also know if you've got a Christian worldview, the things of the world hate the things of God. And as the world expands, it hates even more. These are unsettling times. And your children are going to have questions. Our position as parents collectively tends to be keep your children at peace and calm. Keep your children happy. I don't understand the parents, and I know parents who think might as well introduce the kids to the darkness of society. They're going to find it anyway. I know a guy who has a 16-year-old son, and he uses profanity in his language with his kid, and his kid uses profanity all the time. Knows enough not to use it at school, otherwise he'll get in trouble. His kid also looks at pornography. I'm leaving the identities of the people here, but I want to assure you I know this guy. He's in a marriage, happily married, and he and his wife, their attitude with their kid, they're unchurched, they're progressive, and their attitude is, well, this is what goes on in life. The kid looks at porn on the internet. They don't do anything to stop it. The kid trash talks with his friends and uses all sorts of profanity, even in conversations with his parents, and his parents do too. And their view is that, this is what he's going to do out of the house. We shouldn't be fake. My view is you should set standards in your house and try to raise your children to comply with those standards. And those standards should include not using profanity, even if the kid's going to use it, even if you use it, because in polite, common society, you shouldn't. And also, porn is bad and corrupting. Just because a kid may find it, your kid may smoke too. You shouldn't go buy your kid his first pack of cigarettes. It's going to harm his lungs. The world does things differently. But assuming you're not that sort of parent, and by the way, I like the guy. I do. We don't have a lot in common. We don't hang out. He's not someone I would call a friend. I know this person. And assuming you're not that sort of person, assuming you're kind of a normal parent, you're trying to protect your kid. You don't want your child to grow up too fast. You want your child to have a normal semblance of life. I sometimes, if I'm honest, I feel a little guilty here. Do you know what my kids hate? Really? Maybe I shouldn't be sharing too much of this. My kids hate elections. They hate elections. They don't like election seasons. One, because of the amount of work that I do, but more It's because we had people show up at our house to threaten us over an election. My kids were bullied over an election. They lost friends over an election, not because they were involved in the election, but because people didn't like what I was saying about the election in 2016 when I was critical of Trump. My kids don't like elections. Election season comes around and my kids noticeably, visibly get a little antsy. They worry. And we do our best to reassure them everything's going to be okay. We don't lie to them. Sometimes we don't tell them the whole truth because we don't want them to worry, because we know that it's really not that big of a deal, but the kids will make it into a bigger deal. Right now, a lot of kids are at school talking about war with Russia. And I think you can safely reassure your children that we're not going to war and they are not going to war and no one's going to get drafted. No one's going to Ukraine. We're not going to have a Hitler-style blitzkrieg across Europe. We're not going to. We're not going to have a massive war with China. Not now. Maybe later, but not now. There's no reason to worry about what might happen. Tomorrow's got enough troubles. Today's got enough troubles. Leave the worrying to God. Worry's a sin. But what do you tell your children about what's going on? I think you do need to tell your children that when the United States shows weakness, the rest of the world takes advantage of it. It's a true statement. When the United States shows weakness, the rest of the world does take advantage of it, and we must be strong to keep the world stable. But beyond that, there's something else I think you can tell your kids. That wars are a natural part of the world and its existence. And we should not be fearful of them because we are blessed to live where we are. And we should remember the strength of the United States, even in our situation, we're still the strongest nation on the planet. Decline is a choice we may have made nationally, a choice to decline, but your kids can choose differently. But more than that, I want to come back to this data on the church. Those people who regularly go to church are more at peace with the world. Those people who have a church community live longer than everyone else. Those people who go to church regularly have better mental health than everyone else. Do you understand what I'm trying to tell you? The Barna Group, which surveys churches, largely says, you know what, give up trying to bring people back into church who left during the pandemic. I don't think you should. And I think if you're one of those people or you haven't found a church home, there are plenty of them out there. And the data speaks for itself. This is data from Pew Research and from Barna, two globally respected research institutions. If you have that worldview and you have that place and you have that community of interest in a church, you are more likely to be charitable to the poor. You are more likely to be in a happy marriage. You're more likely to have more sex. You're more likely to have happier kids. You're more likely to live longer. You're more likely to be more optimistic about the long term. You're more likely to have better mental health. All of these things come from a church community. And by the way, you should understand it's different from other communities out there. There are other communities, there are charitable communities, there are involvements in other civic activities. None of them have this. None of them have this. Regular churchgoers are 5 times more likely to give to the poor. Regular churchgoers are overwhelmingly more likely to adopt than anyone else. They're more likely to have sex. They're more likely to have better mental health. They're more likely to have happier kids. They're more likely to be generous. They're more likely to have happy marriages. They're less likely to divorce. They're more likely to live in a community free of burglary, larceny, robbery, assault, and homicide. They're less likely to be one of the people who commits those crimes as well. Their children are less likely to suffer from depression, substance abuse, and sexual promiscuity. There's a real difference there. And you should remember there's a real difference there. And you can come up with your own reasons why. I have my theory. But I will tell you, If you're struggling, if you're stressed out, if you're worried, if you're fretful, find yourself a church community and make it your community. Because the data, the objective data from Barna, a Christian surveyor, and from Pew, a secular researcher, all shows the same thing. Your world will be better when you show up at a community on Sunday and make it your home. We can come up with different reasons why, but what we can't dispute is the data from inside and outside the church all shows the same thing. And when the world is discombobulated and upside down, reminds me after 9/11, churches were filled up. In COVID, they emptied out. Maybe if you're struggling right now and your kids are fretful, introduce them to one of those communities and build a community there yourself where your worldview can change and you can find some peace in a chaotic world.